In the scorching heat of an 1883 train crossing the Arizona desert, a young woman cooked in silence, unseen, unappreciated, and exhausted from a life that had taken everything from her. But one cowboy, just passing through, saw something no one else did. Not just her work, but her worth. What began as a simple meal and a handwritten note would grow into a love strong enough to change two lives forever. But can a woman who's only known survival learn to believe she deserves to be cherished? This story teaches us that true love begins when someone sees your worth and helps you believe in it too. Welcome to our channel, where we share powerful Western stories about cowboys. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more unforgettable Western journeys.
The locomotive smoke and the smell of sizzling bacon hung heavy in the air as Adelaide Dawson moved down the narrow dining car. She balanced 3 plates on her arms with a skill born of practice. It was June of 1883, and the Southern Pacific train was cutting across the Arizona desert. For 8 long months, ever since her daddy's ranch near Riverside went bust, this train had been her life. It was how she kept a roof over her own head and that of her younger brother. The work was honest, but the tips were small, and the men passing through learned right quick to mind their manners when they saw the steel in her gaze. Back in the cramped kitchen, Sawyer Leeds worked like a whirlwind. Her auburn hair was tucked under a white cap already showing the day's grease stains. That little room, with its coal-fired stove, felt hotter than a branding iron. But she moved with purpose, cracking eggs into one pan while flipping flapjacks on another. She was 22 years old, and this railroad job had been a godsend after cholera had taken her parents 2 years before. Her younger sister Adelaide was out front, serving the food Sawyer cooked. Between the two of them, they made just enough to afford a little house back in Riverside, their sanctuary between trips. A sudden jolt of the train sent a coffee pot sliding, but Sawyer snatched it just in time. She braced herself against the wall, swiping a bead of sweat from her brow. Through the little window into the dining car, she saw Adelaide moving with an easy grace between the tables, her smile a welcoming light. No matter how demanding the passengers got, they had each other, and that was everything. Austin Delaney had been on the trail for 3 solid days before he caught this train. His horse had pulled up lame just outside of Yuma, and he did not have time to waste. So he sold the horse and bought a ticket heading east. He had just finished a long cattle drive and was making his way back to Riverside, where his brother had a small ranch. Austin was 25, with skin baked by the sun and hands calloused from years of hard work. His hat was coated in dust and his boots were worn thin, but his eyes were clear and direct when he looked at you. He found a seat in the back of the dining car, watching the desert blur past as he waited. The server, Adelaide, gave him a nod to let him know she would be with him shortly. So Austin just sat back and took it all in. He was in no special kind of rush. He would get to Riverside by nightfall, and his brother was not expecting him on any particular day. That is when he saw her for the first time, through that small window to the kitchen. The woman in there moved with a fierce energy that grabbed his attention. She was completely focused, juggling a dozen things at once. She was not just cooking food. She was conducting an orchestra of heat and steam. If a pan got too hot, she was on it in a second. When an order came in, she had it memorized instantly. It was truly something to see a person so skilled at their craft. Adelaide finally made it to his table, pulling a small notepad from her apron. "What can I get for you, mister?" she asked. "I would be mighty grateful for some eggs, bacon, and biscuits," Austin replied, his eyes still drifting toward the kitchen window, "and a black coffee." "We sure do have biscuits," Adelaide said, writing it down. "Anything else for you?" "No, ma'am. That will be just fine," he said, handing her the menu. "Looks like a busy morning." "Every morning is busy," she answered with a tired smile. "But we get through it. Your food will be out directly." She headed for the kitchen, and Austin's gaze followed. The cook was now plating a meal with quick, sure hands. As Adelaide went through the door, Austin saw for a moment just how small and hot that kitchen really was. The door swung closed and he shook his head. He had worked cattle drives in summer heat that would make a grown man cry, but at least he had the sky overhead. Being cooped up in a box like that seemed like a special kind of misery. When the food came, it was better than anything Austin could have hoped for. The eggs were perfect, the bacon was crisp, and the biscuits were so light and fluffy the butter just melted right in. He ate slowly, enjoying every single bite. It had been a long while since he had a meal that good. Food on the trail was just for fuel, and the last cook he worked with had a habit of burning everything to a crisp. He was about halfway done when he heard angry voices coming from the kitchen. Austin looked up, and so did a few other folks. He could see Adelaide's back through the window as she stood, facing someone inside. "I do not care what that passenger said," a woman's voice carried out sharp and clear. "I am not sending out meat that is not cooked right. If he wants it bleeding, he can go hunt his own beef." "He is making a fuss," Adelaide's voice answered, much quieter. "He says it is overcooked." "Then he should have said so. Medium means it is cooked through with a little pink. That is what I gave him. If he wants it rare, he has got to open his mouth and say it." A big fellow 2 tables up from Austin pushed his chair back and stood, his face turning red. "Is there a problem with my steak?" Adelaide turned around, her face becoming a polite mask. "No, sir, just a small misunderstanding about the preparation. Would you prefer we cook it less?" "I want it done right the first time," the man snapped. He was dressed in fancy clothes, likely some kind of businessman. "I am paying good money here." Austin watched as the kitchen door swung open and the cook stepped out. She was wiping her hands on her apron. In the better light of the dining car, Austin saw her face clearly. She had strong, high cheekbones and eyes that burned with a quiet fire. She was beautiful, not in a delicate way, but with an intensity that took your breath away. "Sir," she said, her voice steady as a rock, "I do apologize if your steak was not how you like it. I will happily cook you another one. Just tell me exactly how you want it." The businessman looked her over with a sneer. "I expect a certain level of competence. Is that too much to ask?" "No, sir, it is not." Sawyer's voice stayed calm, but Austin saw how tight her shoulders were. "I will be glad to prepare your steak again. Rare, medium, or well done?" "Rare. And it better be perfect." "Yes, sir." Sawyer turned on her heel and went back into the kitchen without another word. Adelaide cleared the man's plate as he sat back down, grumbling about the help. Austin felt his own jaw clench. He knew men like that, men who thought their money gave them a license to be cruel. The cook had handled that man with a whole lot more dignity than Austin would have. He finished his breakfast, then flagged Adelaide down for another coffee. He was not quite ready to leave yet. He watched through the window as Sawyer cooked the new steak with careful precision. When Adelaide served it, the businessman cut into it, took a bite, and then kept on eating without a word. No apology, no thank you, just the smug look of a man who got his way. When Adelaide came back to refill his coffee, Austin spoke in a low voice. "That lady in the kitchen is a heck of a cook." Adelaide's expression softened just a bit. "She is my sister, the best cook this railroad has ever seen." "I believe it," Austin said. "This was the finest breakfast I have had in years." "I will be sure to tell her you said so. She does not get to hear that nearly enough." Austin glanced over at the businessman. "She handled that fella real well." "She has to," Adelaide said, her voice hardening. "Men like him think they can say whatever they want to a woman doing this kind of work. But Sawyer, she knows how to hold her head high. We both do. It is just part of the job." "It should not have to be," Austin said simply. Adelaide looked at him, and for a second he saw surprise in her eyes. Then she gave him a true smile. "No, it should not. But this is the world we are living in." She moved away to see to another table. Austin sipped his coffee and thought about it. He had grown up in Texas and pushed cattle all over the territories. He had seen his share of tough times and mean people. But there was something especially wrong about watching someone put so much skill and pride into their work, only to be dismissed by someone who could not do half of what she did. The train started to slow down for a scheduled stop at a small station. People would get off and new folks would get on. Austin stayed right where he was, nursing his coffee. Through the window, he could see Sawyer already starting to prep for the lunch crowd, her knife moving in a quick, steady rhythm. When Adelaide came to clear away his cup, Austin set out payment for his meal, adding a hefty tip on top. He asked her, "Would you mind telling me your sister's name? I'd like to give the cook a proper compliment." Adelaide paused for a second before saying, "Sawyer. Her name is Sawyer Leeds." "I appreciate that, Miss Leeds," he said, handing her the money. "And you must be Adelaide." "I am." Her eyes widened a little when she saw the tip. "Sir, this is far too generous." "It is not, ma'am. It is just what is right. You and your sister work mighty hard. You both ought to be recognized for it." Adelaide's eyes seemed to shine for a moment, and she blinked fast. "Thank you. That is awfully decent of you." Austin got to his feet, placing his hat on his head. "I might just be back for the noon meal. If the cooking is half as good as breakfast was, it will surely be worth the trip." He walked back to the passenger car and found his seat with the rest of the folks. But his thoughts kept drifting back to that kitchen, to the woman working in that blistering heat, who handled rude customers with such quiet dignity. Something about her had snagged his attention and just would not turn loose. The train kept rolling through the Arizona desert, and the landscape outside the windows looked like it was waving in the heat. Austin attempted to read a newspaper he had picked up in Yuma, but the print just swam before his eyes. At last, he gave it up and just stared out at the passing land, letting his mind roam. He started thinking about what he truly wanted out of his life. He was 25 years old and had been working with cattle since he was 14. It was tough, honest work, but he was beginning to wonder if that was all he wanted to do for the rest of his days. His brother had already settled down and was building something that would last. Maybe it was his turn to think about putting down roots. As lunchtime drew near, Austin found himself heading back to the dining car, though he had not consciously decided to go. The car was getting crowded with passengers, but he was able to get the very same table he had earlier. Adelaide showed up right away, wearing her professional smile. "You are back for lunch, I see. Your sister's cooking is tough to pass up," Austin admitted plainly. "What would you suggest? The roast beef is wonderful. And Sawyer baked fresh bread this morning right before we pulled out of Yuma. I will have that then with some water, please." Adelaide gave a nod, and then she was gone. Austin could see Sawyer moving around the kitchen through the service window, her actions as smooth and sure as they were in the morning. She looked up just once, her eyes sweeping over the dining car, and for a heartbeat her gaze met his. Then she turned her attention back to her work. When the roast beef came, it was tender and seasoned just right, and the bread was warm with a good crust. Austin ate with real pleasure, wishing he knew how to tell the cook just how much he respected the care she put into her craft. In his experience, most food on the railroad was barely fit to eat. Just something to fill your belly and nothing more. This was different. This food was made by someone who took pride in what she did, someone who cared about feeding people well. While he was eating, Austin saw a young mother at a table nearby having a hard time with a crying baby and a squirming little boy. The woman looked absolutely worn out, with a wrinkled dress and her hair falling out of its pins. The toddler was trying to wiggle out of his chair while the baby just kept on wailing. Other folks were starting to cast irritated looks their way. Adelaide went over to the table, and Austin saw her speak gently to the mother. A minute later, Adelaide came back from the kitchen with a little plate of soft bread pieces and a cup of warm milk. She put them down for the little boy and then offered to hold the baby so his mother could eat. The relief that washed over the young woman's face was plain to see. Austin noticed Sawyer watching from the kitchen window with a small smile. It was the first time he had seen her smile, and it changed her whole face, softening her serious look into something much gentler. The train clattered along, eating up the miles of track. Austin polished off his meal and leaned back, happy to watch the scenery and steal a glance toward the kitchen now and then. He tried to tell himself he was just admiring good work, the same as he would a fine saddle or a well-broke horse. But he knew deep down that was not the whole truth. There was something about Sawyer Leeds that had worked its way under his skin. When Adelaide came to take his plate, Austin spoke without thinking. "How long have you and your sister been working on this line?" 8 months, Adelaide told him, stacking the plates neatly. "We have been on our own since our folks passed. We stay in Riverside when we are not on a run. Riverside is my destination." Austin paused for a moment. "This has to be a hard life." "It is. But it is honest work that keeps a roof over our heads and food on the table. Not everyone can say that. That is the truth." Austin paid for his meal, leaving another large tip. "You both do fine work. I surely hope you know that." Adelaide's smile was warmer this time. "Thank you." Sawyer, in particular, could use to hear that. She pours her whole heart into her cooking. After lunch, Austin went back to the passenger car but felt too fidgety to sit still. He was never one for being idle for too long. On cattle drives, he was constantly on the move, always with something to do. Being stuck on a train with nothing to do wore on his nerves. He took out some paper and a pencil from his bag, figuring he would write a letter to his brother to tell him he would be arriving that night. But instead of writing about the cattle drive or his plans, he found himself writing something completely different. "Miss Leeds," he started, and then he stopped. What in the world was he doing? He did not even know the woman. They had never exchanged a single word, but the words just kept flowing. "Anyway, I wanted to tell you how much I appreciated the meals you made today. It has been a good long while since I have had food that was made with such clear skill and care. From what I have seen, most people only do what they have to do to get by. You do more than that. You make something that feeds more than just the body. It feeds something deeper. A woman who puts that much of herself into feeding others deserves to be cherished, not just put up with or thanked now and then. I hope someone tells you that all the time, but just in case they do not, I wanted to make sure you knew it. Yours respectfully, Austin Delaney." He read the note again, wondering if he had gone crazy. This was too bold, too personal. She would probably think he was some kind of strange fellow. But a part of him insisted that she needed to read these words, that maybe nobody had ever told her that her hard work truly meant something beyond a simple meal bought and paid for. Before he could talk himself out of it, Austin folded the note and headed back to the dining car. The lunch crowd was gone, with just a few passengers left at the tables. Adelaide was wiping down a counter, and she glanced up as he came near. "Could you see that your sister gets this?" Austin asked, holding out the folded paper. "It is just a note to thank her for the fine meals." Adelaide took the note, looking curious but not distrustful. "I will make sure she gets it. I appreciate that." Austin tipped the brim of his hat and went straight back to the passenger car before his nerve gave out. In the kitchen, Sawyer was getting ready for the dinner service, slicing potatoes for a hash. Her arms were aching from the endless work, and the kitchen's heat had given her a throbbing headache. But she just kept on working. She always kept working. If she ever stopped, she would have too much time to think about how bone-tired she was, and how unsure their future still was. Just then, Adelaide came through the door holding the note. "One of the passengers wanted me to give this to you." Sawyer wiped her hands on her apron and took the piece of paper. "Which passenger?" "That cowboy who was in here for breakfast and lunch. The one at table 12. Sawyer had noticed him, even though she tried not to. Most of the men who looked through the kitchen window were just looking at her like they would any woman, sizing her up in a way that often felt coarse. But this man had seemed different. His gaze felt respectful in a way that was not prying. She had told herself not to make anything of it. Men looked at women. It is just what they did. She opened the note and read it. Her eyes went over the words once, and then she read them again as her throat started to feel tight. Adelaide stepped closer, looking worried. "What is in it?" Sawyer just handed her the note. Adelaide read it, and her eyebrows shot up. Well now, that is really something. It is just foolishness, Sawyer said, but her voice did not sound very convincing. She took the note back and folded it up neatly. He is just trying to be nice. He left big tips too, Adelaide added. And he seems like a good man, not like most of the fellows who ride this train. That does not mean a thing. Sawyer put the note in her apron pocket. We likely will not ever see him again after tonight. The train gets to Riverside this evening, and he will be on his way. He did say he was going to Riverside. Maybe we will see him. Sawyer shook her head and went back to her potatoes. Riverside is not a small town, and we are gone most of the week anyway. Do not go making a big deal out of nothing, Adelaide. But as she worked for the rest of the afternoon, Sawyer kept finding her hand touching her pocket, feeling the folded paper inside. A woman who feeds others deserves to be cherished. When was the last time anyone had ever said a word like that about her? Cherished. It sounded strange, like a word from a different country, one she had never even heard before. Learned how to talk. Their mama had treasured them right before the cholera came and took her. Their daddy had loved them too in his own rough way before he followed his wife into the great beyond just 3 days later. After that, it was just about getting by, plain and simple. It was all about the work, the wages, and always wondering if they had enough for the rent, enough for food, enough to make it just one more week. The dinner service was a whirlwind. Passengers were famished after a long day on the rails. Sawyer found her rhythm in the cooking, a familiar dance with the fire and the clock and getting the food on the plates. Adelaide darted in and out of that hot kitchen, calling out orders and carrying out meals. They moved together like clockwork, two sisters who could read each other's every move and thought without ever saying a word. Austin never showed up for supper. Sawyer told herself she wasn't let down, that it didn't mean a thing, but she couldn't stop her eyes from scanning the dining car every time Adelaide pushed through the swinging door. It's just curiosity, she thought, the kind any person might have. The train chugged into Riverside just as the sun went down, painting the whole sky in strokes of orange and pink. Passengers started grabbing their bags, ready to be off that train after such a long ride. Adelaide and Sawyer had another hour of work ahead, cleaning the kitchen and the dining car before they could head home. It was always the hardest part of the day, working when you were dog-tired, knowing your own bed was close but still so far away. Austin stepped down from the train into the warm Riverside evening, his satchel thrown over one shoulder. The town had sure gotten bigger since he was last through here, with new buildings popping up all along the main drag. California was growing in a hurry. Folks were pouring in, and dusty little outposts were turning into real towns. He knew he ought to head straight for his brother's ranch. But instead, he just stood there by the station, watching the train crew do their chores after the long trip. He was acting like a fool. That note he wrote was reckless enough. Hanging around like some moon-eyed boy was even worse. But he couldn't shake the feeling that walking away right then would be a mistake. Life doesn't give a man too many chances for a real connection. And when it does, a wise man pays attention. He was still wrestling with himself when he saw them coming out of the train. It was two women carrying their bags and walking with that deep-down weariness of folks at the end of a long, hard shift. Adelaide saw him first, and her eyes got a little wide. She whispered something to her sister, and Sawyer looked up, her eyes finding Austin's right across the platform. For a second, they just stood there, looking at each other. Then, without even thinking about it, Austin started walking toward them, his mind made up. He tipped the brim of his hat, nodding to each of the ladies. "Mr. Delaney," Adelaide said with a little hint of a smile. "You're still in Riverside." "I live here now. Well, my brother does. I work on his ranch when I'm not pushing cattle." He turned his gaze to Sawyer, who was watching him with a look he couldn't quite decipher. "I wanted to thank you again for the fine meals today, and I hope my note wasn't out of line." Sawyer just shook her head a little. "It was not out of line. It was kind. I thank you." Her voice was deeper than he'd figured, a little husky, like she lived her life breathing in smoke and heat, which he reckoned she did. "I meant every word I wrote," Austin told her. "Every single one. Why? The question came out sharp, almost like she didn't trust him. You don't even know me. I know you take pride in what you do. I know you can handle difficult folks with a whole lot of grace. I know you care about feeding people a good meal, even when they don't give you thanks for it. He gave a little shrug. That tells me a fair bit about the kind of person you are. Sawyer's hard expression seemed to soften just a little. Most folks don't see it like that. They just see a woman doing a service job. Nothing special. Well then, most folks are fools. Adelaide cleared her throat softly. Sawyer, we ought to be getting home. It's been a mighty long day. Yes, but Sawyer didn't look away just yet. She held Austin's gaze, and something in her face seemed to change. Will you be taking this train again? I don't know. Maybe so. The truth was, he'd just decided that he surely would be. Do y'all work this same route every week? We leave every Monday morning, get back Thursday evening, Yuma and back. Then I will see you again, Austin said. It felt like a promise he was making to himself as much as to her. They went their separate ways then. The sisters walked on into town while Austin set off to find his brother's place. But as he walked down the darkening streets, Austin felt something he hadn't felt in a good many years. He felt anticipation, not for the next cattle drive or the next payday, but for Monday morning, and the chance to see Sawyer Leeds again. His brother's ranch was a humble little place a few miles out from town. There was a small house, a barn with a corral, and just enough land for a small herd of cattle. Aaron Delaney was 3 years older than Austin, married with a baby girl, and trying to build a life that would last out in California. Aaron was in the barn when Austin got there, and he stood up straight from mucking out a stall with a big old grin. About time you finally showed up. I was starting to think that last drive did you in. It came close a time or two, Austin confessed, gripping his brother's hand firmly. It's real good to see you. You too. Come on up to the house. Martha's going to want to get some food in you. Over supper, Austin just listened as his brother talked about the ranch, his plans to grow the herd, and how hard it was to find good help. Martha served him pot roast and potatoes, while their little girl, not even a year old, babbled away from her high chair. It was a warm and comfortable picture, the kind of settled family life Austin had never given much thought to before. But that night, he found himself watching closely, seeing the way Aaron looked at his wife, the easy comfort between them that came from a long partnership, and seeing the pride in Martha's eyes when she talked about the garden she was growing and the preserves she was putting up for the winter. This was what people built when they finally stopped roaming and decided to put down some roots. That night, lying on the narrow bed in his brother's spare room, Austin took out the note he'd given Sawyer and read it again by the moonlight shining through the window. A woman who feeds others deserves to be cherished. He'd scribbled those words down without much thought, but they had been true. And now, after talking to her, after seeing both the strength and the weariness in her eyes, he believed them even more. The weekend crawled by. Austin helped his brother with chores around the ranch, fixing fences and moving cattle. It was good, honest work that usually brought him peace, but this time his mind kept wandering. Monday felt like it was a lifetime away, and he found himself just counting down the hours. On Sunday evening, Aaron finally noticed how distracted he was. You got something weighing on you? Austin thought about making something up, but then figured against it. I met someone on the train ride over here. Aaron's eyebrows shot up. Someone? A woman. She's the cook in the dining car. Austin felt a little clumsy trying to explain it. I only spoke to her the one time, Aaron, but there was just something about her. And you're aiming to see her again? I'm planning to get on that train tomorrow morning. I'll make up some reason about needing to check on something down in Yuma. Aaron looked him over for a long moment and then gave a slow nod. Well, I never thought I'd see the day you'd be interested in settling down. I don't know if that's what this is, Austin said with honesty. I just know I've got to see her again, and talk to her proper. Then you ought to do it. Life's too short to walk away from something that feels important. Monday morning, Austin was at that station long before the train was set to leave. He had bought a round-trip ticket to Yuma, a costly whim that was going to take a big bite out of his savings, but he couldn't make himself worry about it. When Sawyer and Adelaide showed up to start their day, they looked downright surprised to see him there on the platform. Adelaide gave him a smile, but Sawyer's face was harder to read. He saw a mix of confusion and maybe a little hope warren in her eyes. Austin walked up to them, holding his hat in his hands. "Miss Leeds, Miss Adelaide." "Good morning, Mr. Delaney," Sawyer replied. "I sure didn't figure on seeing you again so soon." "I've got some business down in Yuma," Austin said, and the fib rolled off his tongue easy enough. "Figured it would be foolish not to enjoy some excellent cooking while I traveled." A tiny smile played at the corners of Sawyer's mouth. "I see. Well, I hope the food is up to your expectations." "I don't have a single doubt it will be." That train journey turned into a regular habit over the next few weeks. Austin rode all the way to Yuma and back, making up fancier and fancier stories for why he had to travel. He always ate his meals in the dining car, always left a generous tip, and always found a few moments to talk with Sawyer or Adelaide. At first, Sawyer kept her distance. Her answers were polite, but they were short. She was clearly not used to someone paying her so much kind attention. Austin could see her trying to puzzle out what he was after, what he could possibly want from her. But he wasn't after anything, other than the simple chance to get to know her better. Little by little, she started to open up. They'd have small talks while she was putting food on a plate and he was sitting at his regular table. They'd have quick chats when Adelaide was tied up with other passengers. He learned that she had taught herself to cook right after their mama died, using a borrowed cookbook and nothing but pure grit. He learned that she loved her sister something fierce and would do anything to make sure they were safe and had food on the table. He learned that she was 22, but felt a whole lot older, worn out from all the responsibility and loss. In return, Austin told her about his own life, about growing up in Texas, and learning how to work cattle from his own father before the fever hit him. Coming out west with Aaron to find something better, he'd known the loneliness of the trail. He'd felt the deep satisfaction of a hard day's work done right. But lately, a feeling had been growing that he was meant for more than just aimless wandering. "What would more look like?" Sawyer asked him one afternoon. She was leaning against the kitchen doorway during one of those rare, quiet moments. Austin gave it some real thought. "A place of my own," he said. "Not a big fancy ranch, but a piece of land I could build up and take care of. Work that means something more than just the next paycheck." He met her gaze. "And someone to share it all with." Sawyer looked away, but not before he saw a blush creep up her cheeks. "That sounds like a mighty fine dream. What about you? What do you dream about?" She was quiet for a long time. Safety and security. Not having to lay awake at night wondering where next month's rent will come from. "Maybe a kitchen of my own one day, not this little bitty rail car," she said with a sad smile. "Small dreams, I guess." "They are not small," Austin said, his voice soft. "They are the most important dreams of all, and you deserve to have every one of them come true." The train swayed as it took a curve, and Sawyer had to grab the door frame to steady herself. Austin started to get up, reaching out on pure instinct to help her, and for a second his hand wrapped around her wrist. The touch was like a lightning strike, sending a jolt straight through him that had nothing to do with the train. Sawyer's eyes went wide, and he could see his own surprise mirrored right there in them. They just stood there, frozen for a heartbeat. Then Sawyer gently pulled her hand away. "I ought to get back to it, of course." Austin sat back down, his heart pounding against his ribs. That one little touch had just confirmed something he had been trying his best to ignore. This was a whole lot more than just admiration or respect. He was falling hard for Sawyer Leeds. The thought should have scared him half to death. Instead, it just felt right, like the last piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Adelaide had been watching this slow-burn courtship with a growing sense of approval. She cornered Austin one afternoon while Sawyer was busy with the dinner preparations. "You are serious about her," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am, I surely am. She has been hurt before. Not by a man, exactly, but by life itself. She does not trust easy. I understand that." Adelaide watched him, her eyes sharp. "She does not believe she deserves good things. She thinks no one would want her for who she is, only for what she can do for them. Then I will just have to convince her otherwise." Austin met her gaze without flinching. "How?" "By showing up. By being steady. By meaning every word I say. That is all I know how to do, Miss Adelaide. Be honest and keep my word." Adelaide's face softened just a little. That might just be enough. As May turned into June, and the summer heat baked California and the Arizona territory, Austin kept taking his weekly train trips. His brother had stopped asking what his business was in Yuma, though he would just smile with a knowing look every time Austin announced he was heading out again. Austin's savings were starting to get thin with all the train tickets adding up, but he just could not make himself stop. Sawyer had started to get more comfortable around him. Her smiles came a little easier, and sometimes her laugh would break through that serious way she had about her. She would save him the best cuts of meat, and she would have his coffee ready exactly how he liked it before he even had to ask. They were small things, but they spoke of a growing warmth. Still, there was a wall between them, one you could not see, but you could sure feel it. Austin felt it every time their talk drifted too close to anything personal, and Sawyer would pull back. She would tell him facts about her life, but never her feelings. She would listen to all his dreams, but never offer up any of her own. It all came to a head one blistering afternoon in late June. The train was crossing the desert between Yuma and Riverside, and the heat inside that dining car was just plain awful, even with the windows open. There were hardly any passengers that day. Most folks had better sense than to travel in this kind of weather. Austin sat at his table, watching Sawyer through the little kitchen window. She looked absolutely wrung out. Her face was flushed from the heat of the stove, and her movements were slower than he had ever seen them. When Adelaide brought him his lunch, he could see the worry in her eyes, too. "Is she all right?" he asked in a low voice. "She did not sleep a wink last night. The heat in our little house is just unbearable." Adelaide glanced back toward the kitchen. "She will never admit it when she is struggling. She just never does. Maybe she ought to take a break, get some rest. You try telling her that. She will work until she drops before she will ever admit she needs a lick of help." Austin frowned, a knot of worry tightening in his gut. He finished his food in a hurry, then walked over to the kitchen door. Sawyer was standing at the stove, stirring a big pot, just going through the motions. "Sawyer," he called through the serving window. She looked up, and a flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Austin, do you need something? I need you to take a break. You look like you're about to fall flat on your face." "I am fine." But even as the words left her mouth, she swayed a little, catching herself on the counter. Austin did not even think. He pushed right through the door into her kitchen, breaking the rule about passengers not being allowed back there. Sawyer straightened up, opening her mouth to tell him off, but he was already by her side, his hand gently on her elbow. "When was the last time you had any water?" he demanded. I do not remember. Sit down." He guided her to a small stool in the corner, then found a cup and filled it from the water barrel. "Drink this. All of it." Sawyer took the cup, her hands shaking just a little bit. She drank it down like he said, and Austin could see the life come back into her as the water hit her system. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I guess I let myself get too wrapped up in the work. You can't look after everybody else if you do not look after yourself first." Austin knelt in front of her, putting himself at her eye level. "Sawyer, you work too hard. You push yourself way too far. I do not have a choice. Adelaide and we depend on this job. I understand that. But working yourself into the ground is not going to help anybody." He paused for a second, then said what had been building up in his chest for weeks. "Let me help you, please." Sawyer's eyes went wide. "What?" "Let me help. With money, I mean. I have got some savings. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to give you and Adelaide some breathing room. You could work a little less, rest a little more. No. The word was sharp and fast. Sawyer stood up, nearly knocking the cup over. No, absolutely not, Sawyer. I do not take charity, Austin. I never have. And I am not about to start. Adelaide and I, we take care of our own. It would not be charity. It would be a gift from somebody who cares about you. And what would you expect in return? Her voice had gone cold and hard. Men do not just give women money for no reason. Those words hit Austin like a slap in the face. Is that really what you think of me? Sawyer's expression faltered for a second. I do not know what to think. I do not understand why you keep coming back here, why you are so interested in me. Women like me do not get courted by men like you. What is that supposed to mean? Women like you? Poor working-class women cooking in a train kitchen? Sawyer's voice cracked just a tiny bit. You could have any woman you want, Austin. Why are you wasting your time on me? Austin stood up slowly, his heart just aching for the raw pain he heard in her voice. Because you are the woman I want, not just any woman. You. Specifically you. Why? Because you are strong and you are skilled, and you are kind. Because you work with such dedication and you care about doing things the right way. Because you love your sister and you take such good care of her. Because when you smile, it lights up your entire face. He took one step closer. Because from the very first moment I saw you through that window, cooking in this impossible heat and handling all that chaos with such grace, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Sawyer was just staring at him, her eyes wide and full of uncertainty. Austin, I am not offering you money because I expect something for it, Austin said, his voice firm. I am offering because I care about you, and I hate to see you hurting yourself trying to carry the whole world on your shoulders. But if you will not take my help, then at least take this. You are worth so much more than you think you are. You deserve to rest and to have comfort, and to have someone who sees just how extraordinary you are. The kitchen went quiet, except for the rumble of the train and the bubbling pot on the stove. Sawyer opened her mouth, then closed it again, then just shook her head, helpless. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything right now. Austin started backing toward the door, giving her some space. Just think about it, please. He left the kitchen before she could say another word and went back to his seat in the dining car. His hands were shaking from the rush of it all. He figured he had said too much, pushed way too hard. She would pull away for good this time, build those walls up higher and stronger than ever. But an hour later, as the train was getting close to Riverside and the sun was starting to dip, toward the horizon, Sawyer came out of the kitchen. She walked right up to his table, wiping her hands on her apron like she was nervous. Can we talk? She asked quietly. After we finish the shift, Adelaide can handle the cleanup by herself. Austin's heart gave a leap. Of course. Yes. Whatever you need. When the train finally rolled into the Riverside station, and the last of the passengers had gotten off, Sawyer met Austin on the platform. The evening air was cooler out here, and a light breeze carried the smell of orange groves from the nearby fields. They walked in silence for a little while, leaving the busy station behind for the quieter streets of town. Finally, Sawyer spoke. I'm sorry for what I said back there. About you expecting something back, that was not right. I reckon you have dealt with men who always wanted something in return, Austin said softly. I can see why you would be wary. But that does not give me the right to judge you for it. Sawyer stopped walking and turned to look at him. The truth is, I am scared of what you are offering, of the things you are saying. It all sounds too good to be true. Why? Because good things do not happen to me, Austin. They just never have. My folks passed away. My daddy's ranch went under. Adelaide and I have been getting by on almost nothing for 2 years. I learned a long time ago not to wish for anything better, because hope only ever leads to being let down. A knot formed in Austin's chest. I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen again. Life is not built that way. But I can promise you this, I am not going anywhere. I will be here. I will keep on caring for you, whether you take my help or not. Sawyer's eyes glistened with tears she would not let fall. Why? Why pick me? I already told you. Because you are one of a kind. I am not. I am just a woman trying to get by. You are more than that. So much more. Austin reached out his hand slow, giving her a chance to pull back, and took hers. Let me show you. Let me court you the right way. No offers of money, no handouts. Just me, trying to prove how much I admire and care about you. Sawyer glanced down at their joined hands, then looked back up into his face. I do not know how to do this. I have never been courted. Me neither, not really. We can figure it out as we go. A little smile played on her lips. That sounds mighty frightening. Most of the best things are. Austin gave her hand a gentle squeeze. What do you say, Sawyer? Will you let me try? She was silent for a long moment, and Austin could practically see the battle going on inside her. Fear was wrestling with hope, and caution was fighting against desire. At last, she gave a small nod. All right, yes. But we have to go slow, Austin. I need to take things slow. As slow as you want. I am not going anywhere. They walked back to the station where Adelaide was waiting, their hands still linked. Austin felt light as a feather, like the whole world had suddenly turned brighter. She had said yes. That was the only thing that mattered. The courtship that started then was not like anything Austin had ever known. It was pieced together in quiet moments between train stops and in letters they sent back and forth on the days Sawyer was in Riverside while Austin worked his brother's ranch. It was patient and slow, honoring Sawyer's need for time and space while carefully building something real between them. Austin stopped making up reasons to travel to Yuma. He started meeting Sawyer in Riverside on her days off instead. They would stroll through town, or he would help her with fixes around the little house she and Adelaide rented. They were simple, everyday things that felt brand new because they were experiencing them with each other. Adelaide watched their bond grow with a knowing smile, sometimes joining them on their walks, but mostly giving them their privacy. She saw the difference in her sister. How Sawyer's smile came quicker now, and her laughter was more free. The haunted shadow that had been in her eyes since their parents died was finally starting to fade. One warm evening in July, Austin brought Sawyer out to see his brother's ranch. Aaron and Martha gave her a warm welcome, and during supper, Austin watched Sawyer talk with his family. She was reserved and polite, obviously a little nervous, but her curiosity was real. When Martha's little girl wrapped her tiny hand around Sawyer's finger, the look on Sawyer's face, so soft and full of wonder, made Austin's heart skip a beat. After they ate, they walked the property, with Austin pointing out his brother's plans for growing the place. The sun was going down, painting the sky with brilliant shades of orange and purple. It is beautiful out here, Sawyer said, her gaze sweeping over the land. So peaceful. It is. Austin paused and turned to her. I have been doing a lot of thinking about what comes next for me. I want to stay in Riverside, give up the cattle drives, and work with Aaron full-time. Maybe one day get a small piece of land for myself. He took a breath, his heart hammering in his chest. And build something that lasts. With you, if you would have me. Sawyer's breath hitched. Austin, that is a huge decision. I know, and I'm not asking you to decide anything this second. I just need you to know that I am serious about this, about us. You are not just a passing interest to me. You are the future I want to build. Sawyer was quiet for a good while, just looking at the sunset. When she finally turned to him, her voice was soft. I am starting to believe you. It is terrifying, but it is also wonderful. Austen reached out and gently tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. "You do not have to be scared. I have got you." She looked right at him, and deep in her eyes, he saw something new. It was trust. It was delicate and new, but it was there. "Kiss me," she whispered. Austen did not need to be told twice. He framed her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and gentle, like she was the most precious thing in the world. Sawyer made a quiet sound deep in her throat, her hands reaching up to clutch his shirt, and the kiss turned into something deeper, more urgent. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Sawyer leaned her forehead against his. "I think I am falling in love with you." "I know I am falling in love with you," Austen answered. "Have been since that first day on the train." They just stood there as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to pop out in the darkening sky, holding on to each other, letting the feeling of that moment settle deep into their bones, solid and unshakable. The weeks that came after were some of the best in Austen's whole life. He worked on the ranch through the week, learning the business side of running a cattle operation. On weekends and Thursdays, when Sawyer was back from her train run, they spent every second they could together. He discovered more about her every single day. He learned that she loved to read but almost never had the time for it, that she had a sharp wit that would come out once she felt comfortable enough to let her guard down, that she was incredibly smart, always watching and figuring out the world around her, and that she had dreams that went beyond just getting by, dreams of maybe opening her own little cafe someday, a place where she could cook without being tied to a railroad schedule. In return, Sawyer learned about Austen's deep loyalty to his family, his quiet self-assurance, and his gentle strength. She saw the way he treated everybody with respect, no matter who they were. She learned about his dreams of building something that would last, of having children one day and teaching them the value of hard work and good character. Toward the end of August, Austen went to his brother with a proposition. "I want to buy into the ranch. I want to be a partner, not just a hired man." Aaron looked up from the ledgers he was going over. "What brought this on?" "I am ready to put down roots. For real this time. And I need to be able to provide for a family." Aaron's eyes got wide. "You are fixing to ask Sawyer to marry you." "Eventually, when she is ready. But I want to have something real to offer her when I do." They spent the next week working out the details. Austen had saved up most of what he had earned from years of driving cattle, and it was enough to buy a 1/4 share of the ranch. They would split the profits to match, and Austen would take charge of growing the herd, while Aaron handled the business side of things. On a Thursday evening in September, after the summer heat had finally broken, and you could feel the first hint of autumn in the air, Austen took Sawyer to a spot that looked out over Riverside. The town was spread out below them, its windows beginning to glow as night fell. "I have got something to tell you," Austen said, taking both of her hands in his. Sawyer looked worried. "What is it?" "I bought into Aaron's ranch. I am a partner now, not just help, which means I have a steady income and a real future." He paused. "I am not proposing. Not yet. I know you still need time, but I wanted you to know that I am building a life for us." Sawyer's eyes filled with tears. "Austen, that is incredible. I'm so proud of you. I could not have done it without you, without knowing what I was working for." He drew her in closer. "You gave me a reason, Sawyer. A direction. Before I met you, I was just drifting. Now I know exactly where I'm headed." "And where is that?" "Wherever you are." She kissed him then, a deep and passionate kiss that poured all of her feelings into that one embrace. When they finally came up for air, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I am ready," she said, her voice low. "Ready for what?" "For whatever is next, with you." She pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. "I love you, Austen. All of you, with everything I have. I am done being afraid. Austin felt like his heart was about to burst right out of his chest. I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes. Good. We can be scared together. That night, as they walked back to town, they started making plans. Real plans. Sawyer would keep her job on the train for a little while longer, but they would start saving up for a restaurant, a small place they could run side by side. Austin would keep building up the ranch with Aaron, making sure they had a steady foundation to stand on. In a year, maybe two, they would have enough saved to make those dreams come true. And then Austin would ask her to marry him properly, with a ring and a whole future stretched out in front of them. But fate, well, it has a habit of not checking your calendar. In October, the railroad company announced it was changing its routes. The main line through Riverside would be... The railroad cut the line, rerouting the whole service through San Bernardino. This left the dining car crew with a hard choice: move to a new town or hunt for another job. Sawyer came to Austin looking pale as a ghost with the bad news. We could ask for spots on the San Bernardino run, but that means leaving Riverside behind. Or we could try to find work here. But there is not much call for women with our kind of experience. Austin's mind went to work right away. What if you did not have to worry about that job? Austin, we have been over this. I am not taking your charity. This is not charity, it is a partnership. He gently took her hands in his. Marry me, Sawyer. Right now, not in 2 years. We can build that restaurant dream together, or you can finally take a moment to just catch your breath. Adelaide can live with us until she gets on her own 2 feet. We will figure it out. Sawyer just stared at him, her eyes wide. That is plumb crazy. We had a whole plan. Plans get changed. Life has a way of doing that. But the one thing that will not ever change is how I feel about you. Right there in her kitchen, Austin dropped to one knee, not a bit worried that he did not have a ring. Sawyer, he said, will you marry me? She looked down at him, a storm of feelings crossing her face. Then a slow smile spread and she started to laugh. Yes, yes, you crazy man. I will marry you. Austin shot up to his feet, sweeping her up in a big hug and spinning her around. She laughed even harder, holding onto his shoulders, and he felt a pure, shining joy run right through him. They got married that November in a quiet courthouse ceremony with Aaron and Martha standing up for them, and Adelaide crying happy tears the whole time. Sawyer wore a lovely white dress that Martha helped her stitch, and Austin had on his Sunday best, all cleaned and pressed. When the judge said they were husband and wife, Austin kissed Sawyer with every bit of love and promise in his heart, and she kissed him back with the same fire. They were partners now, building something that was meant to last. Adelaide came to stay at the ranch with them for a while, using the spare room as they all figured out what came next. She landed a job at the general store in town, and in about 6 months, she would meet a nice young fella who worked at the bank and start her own love story. But that was still down the road. For the time being, the 3 of them made a new kind of family life at the ranch. Sawyer took charge of the cooking, and her meals were so downright amazing that folks started talking. Local ranchers began to swing by, wondering if she might cater a special get-together for them. What began as a job here and there soon turned into a steady stream of work. By the spring of 1884, Sawyer had tucked away enough money from her catering that she and Austin got serious about finding a place in town. They found a little building on Main Street, just the right size for a cozy restaurant. It needed a lot of fixing up, but with Austin's building know-how and Aaron's help, they made it happen. They opened Sawyer's Kitchen that June, a small spot with only 10 tables in a kitchen that was a tight squeeze. But it worked just fine. Sawyer handled most of the cooking, Austin greeted the customers and managed the front, and Adelaide pitched in whenever she had a free moment. The restaurant was a hit right from the start. Riverside was booming, and you could not find a good meal to save your life. Sawyer's years of cooking under tough conditions on the railroad had made her more than ready for a restaurant kitchen. And Austin, with his friendly ways, made every single customer feel like an old friend. One hot evening in July, as they were tidying up after a busy night, Austin found Sawyer in the kitchen scrubbing the stove. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her middle and resting his chin on her shoulder. A good day. he said softly. An exhausting day, Sawyer answered. But she had a smile on her face. But a very good one. I am so proud of you, and of this thing we have made together. She turned around in his arms to look at him. I could not have ever done this without you. You gave me the nerve to dream about more than just getting by. You always had that nerve, he told her. You just needed someone to remind you it was in there. They stood holding each other in the quiet kitchen, with the good smells of the day's cooking still hanging in the air. This was it. This was what they had worked for. Not just the restaurant, but the whole life they were building. The partnership, the love. I have some news, Sawyer said in a low voice. What kind of news is that? The kind that means we are probably going to need to hire more help in the kitchen pretty soon. She took his hand and laid it on her belly, which was still flat. I am pregnant, Austin. Austin just stood there, his mind trying to catch up with her words. Then a wave of joy, so strong it nearly knocked him over, washed through him. For real? For real. I went to see the doctor this morning. We are going to have a baby. Austin kissed her then, a long, deep kiss that tried to say everything he was feeling. When they finally pulled apart, he was grinning from ear to ear. We are going to be parents. Are you happy? Happy does not even come close to covering it. He held her face in his hands. You have given me everything, Sawyer. A home, a reason to be, a future, and now, a child. I do not have the words to tell you how much I love you. Then show me, she whispered back. They locked up the restaurant in a hurry and walked home under the warm night sky, holding hands and talking excitedly about what was to come. They talked about baby names and how they would change the house around, and when Sawyer might need to step back from the kitchen. Plans were piling on top of plans. Dreams were building on top of dreams. Their son was born in February of 1885, a strong, healthy boy with his mama's dark hair and his daddy's handsome face. They named him Samuel after Austin's father. The first time Austin held that little boy, he felt a kind of love so deep he never knew it was possible. Sawyer had hired 2 young women by then, teaching them her ways in the kitchen. She took some time off from the restaurant to be with Samuel, but she could not keep away for long. Cooking was just part of who she was. By the time Samuel was 3 months old, she was back in the kitchen for a few hours every day, with the baby sleeping in a cradle in the corner where she could watch him. The restaurant just kept doing better and better. They bought the building next door, adding more tables and a bigger kitchen. Adelaide married her banker in the summer of 1885, and Austin and Sawyer threw the wedding party at the restaurant. It was a happy night that lasted long past dark. Life found a new rhythm, one that was busy, but deeply good. Austin divided his days between the ranch and the restaurant while Sawyer ran the kitchen with her team. They were creating something solid, something that would be there long after they were gone. It was a legacy for their son and for any other children who might come along. In 1887, their daughter was born. She was a little thing with red hair and green eyes that looked like they saw right through you. They named her Caroline, and she was every bit as spirited and stubborn as her mother from day one. Samuel just loved his baby sister and took his job as a big brother very seriously, even though he was only 2 years old. One evening in late 1888, Austin found Sawyer sitting on their porch, watching the sun go down. She looked worn out but peaceful, with her hair down around her shoulders. He sat down next to her and pulled her close to his side. What is on your mind, he asked her. Just thinking how different my life is from what I ever thought it would be, Sawyer said softly. 5 years ago, I was cooking on a train, just barely scraping by, and I figured that was all life had for me. And now, I have everything, a restaurant that I love, 2 wonderful children, and a husband who is my true partner in every way. She looked up at him. Sometimes I get scared that I will wake up and it was all just a dream. This is no dream. It is real, and it is ours. We built it, you and me. Austin kissed her on the forehead, and we are going to keep on building it for the rest of our lives. That is a mighty long time, not nearly long enough. They sat there together as the sun sank below the horizon, and the stars began to pop out, feeling safe and content in the quiet. From inside the house, they could hear Caroline start to fuss, and then hear Samuel's little voice trying to calm her down, a sweet boy copying the kindness he had always seen from his own parents. The years rolled on, full of small, happy moments and a few bumps in the road. The restaurant became one of the most popular places in Riverside, famous all over Southern California for its fantastic food and friendly atmosphere. Austin and Aaron's ranching business did well, growing bigger every year. Their children grew up healthy and strong, with Samuel having his father's calm nature and Caroline having her mother's fiery spirit. In 1892, Aaron and Martha's family and Austin and Sawyer's family bought a big piece of land together. It was a larger spread where they could build their houses right next to each other and keep growing the ranch. The two families worked that land side by side, building a small legacy that would carry on for generations. Adelaide and her husband had their own children, 3 girls who were about the same age as Samuel and Caroline. The cousins all grew up together, running all over that ranch land, learning how to ride and rope and cook from their folks. Sawyer's Kitchen stayed the heart of their business, but they also started a catering service and began offering cooking classes. Sawyer shared what she knew with anybody who wanted to learn. She was known for being generous with her talents, never keeping her recipes a secret but passing them on to others. For their 10th wedding anniversary in November of 1893, Austin brought Sawyer back to the place where he had first tried to ask for her hand, the spot overlooking Riverside. The town had grown so much you could hardly recognize the little settlement it once was. "Do you remember what I wrote to you that first day?" Austin asked, his arm wrapped around her. "The note I had Adelaide give you." "Every single word," Sawyer said. "A woman who feeds other people deserves to be treasured." I meant it back then, and I mean it even more today. Austin turned to her. "Sawyer, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. The way you give your love, the way you put your heart into your work, the way you have made this life right here with me. I treasure you more each day that goes by." Sawyer's eyes glistened with happy tears. "You gave me every single thing I never even knew I was missing. A real purpose, a true partner, and a love that does not ask for anything but just gives. You taught me I was worth treasuring." "You always were," he said softly. "I just held up a mirror so you could see it too." They shared a kiss as the sun went down over the town they called their own. It was a kiss that held 10 years of love, partnership, and dreams they had built together. Behind them was everything they had made. Ahead of them were many more decades of life and love and family. Their story had started on a train crossing the wide-open desert. It began with a cowboy who saw a woman working in the suffocating heat and saw the value in her spirit. It grew into something bigger than either of them could have dreamed up, a love story planted in respect and admiration that blossomed into a partnership of 2 equals. In 1895, they had another child, a boy they named James. He had his father's easy grin and his mother's quick mind. In 1898, their second daughter, Elizabeth, was born, and their family felt complete. The restaurant kept doing well and was one day passed down to Samuel, who had his mother's gift for cooking. Austin and Sawyer grew old side by side, their love getting deeper with every year that passed. They watched their children get married and have children of their own. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1933, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was proof of the family they had built from the ground up. Sawyer never let herself forget those difficult years on the railroad, cooking in that cramped, hot kitchen with an uncertain future. But it felt like that life had happened to someone else, a younger woman who had not yet learned that she deserved everything Austin promised her on that first day. She had spent her life feeding people, first because she had to, and then because she loved to. And Austin had kept his promise from that first note, treasuring her every single day, not just for the things she could do, but for the person she was, the woman he had fallen for through a train kitchen window, The woman who had given him a sense of purpose, a partner in life, and a love that would span a lifetime. When Austen passed on peacefully in his sleep in 1941 at 83 years old, Sawyer was holding his hand. She told him she had loved him from the first time he saw her working in that train kitchen. He smiled, gave her hand a weak squeeze, and whispered that he knew. He had always known. Sawyer followed him 6 months later, her heart just giving out on a quiet morning. They found her in her kitchen, the place that had been the heart of so much of her life. On the counter lay a worn piece of paper. The ink was faded, but you could still read the words. It was Austen's note from that very first day, which she had carried with her for almost 60 years. Their children laid them to rest side by side in Riverside Cemetery. The simple headstone read, Austen and Sawyer Delaney, partners in life, love, and all things, together always. The restaurant stayed in the family for 2 more generations before it finally closed its doors in the 1980s. But the house that Austen and Sawyer had built still stood on the ranch land. It was a home to their descendants, who kept working the land and honoring the legacy of love and partnership their ancestors had started. It all began with a cowboy who peered through a train kitchen window. He did not just see a woman at work. He saw a person who deserved respect, admiration, and love. He had written a note on a whim, never guessing it would change both of their lives forever. He had shown up time and again, proving with his actions that his words were true. And it all began with a woman who was worn down by loss and tough times, who had forgotten she was worthy of good things. She learned through his patience and devotion that love did not have to be hard or demanding. Sometimes it was as simple as being truly seen and valued for who you were. Their story became a family legend, told from one generation to the next. It was the tale of how Great-Grandpa Austen fell in love at first sight with Great-Grandma Sawyer through that train kitchen window. How he courted her with steady kindness and respect. How they built an entire world together from just one restaurant and a dream of having more than just enough to get by. But more than the successful business or the big family they raised, the thing that lasted was the lesson at the center of their love story. That every single person deserves to be treasured for who they are, not just for what they can do for others. That being true partners means you lift each other up, you back each other's dreams, and you create something together that is bigger than what either of you could do alone. The train that had brought them toward one another was long gone, replaced by highways and then by airplanes. But the truth Austen had written in that note held strong. A woman who feeds others, who gives of herself with skill and a generous heart, who works hard works hard. The toughest of times deserves to be treasured, not just appreciated or thanked or paid, but truly and deeply treasured. That was the gift Austen had given Sawyer. It was the gift Sawyer had given him right back, and what they had both given to every person whose life they touched. Their legacy was not just the restaurant or the ranch or the family tree that branched out across California and farther. It was the lesson that real love sees the worth in another person and shows it to them until they can finally see it for themselves. On the wall of the ranch house where their descendants still lived, there hung a faded photograph from 1893. It was Austen and Sawyer on their 10th anniversary. His arm was around her shoulders, and her head was tilted toward his. Both of them were smiling with the simple comfort of 2 people who had found their perfect other half. Below the picture was a framed piece of paper safe behind glass. The ink was so faint you could hardly see it, but the words were made immortal through family stories. A woman who feeds others deserves to be cherished. 7 words that had changed 2 lives and built a legacy that would last for generations. 7 words that came from a place of real appreciation and respect, from a cowboy who had looked at a woman working in a train kitchen and saw not just her work but her soul. And from those 7 words, a love story for the ages had grown. It was one that proved the best kind of love is not built on big gestures or dramatic speeches. It is built on steady respect, a true partnership, and the everyday choice to see and celebrate the wonder in ordinary life. Austen and Sawyer Delaney had lived that truth every day of their 58 years together. They had built their life on a foundation of respecting and admiring each other, and in return it had given them everything that truly mattered. Not money or fame, though they had a little of both, but something much more precious. A love that lasted, a partnership that held strong, and a family that would carry their values on into the future. Their story had begun on a train crossing the desert heat of the Arizona Territory in 1883. It had ended in 1941 and 1942 with two quiet goodbyes, two lives lived to the fullest, two hearts that had found their perfect match. But in the memories of their children's children, in the values they had taught them, in the very air of the ranch and the town they helped build, Austen and Sawyer were still there. The cowboy who had seen a woman in a train kitchen and recognized her true worth. The woman who had learned she deserved to be treasured, and then spent her own life treasuring others. Together, they had made something beautiful and lasting. They were proof that the truest love stories are the ones built on seeing each other for who you really are, and choosing every single day to honor what you see. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.